MSC Magnifica was one of the worst cruises of my life, and I'm not being dramatic. The ship was awful, the food was genuinely bad to inedible, and the service ranged from indifferent to outright rude. And I spent most of that week wondering why I had even bothered, and I had sworn off MSC entirely. Now, that was a little over 3 years ago, but I just got home from MSC Seascape, and I'm here to tell you, this might shock you, but book it. This is the whole review in 2 sentences, honestly. But the details are what matter because MSC is not just a simple yes or no, and going into an MSC cruise without understanding how this line works is the fastest way to end up disappointed in ways that have nothing to do with the actual product. Hi, I'm Melissa, a university professor who loves to cruise and who loves to talk ship. And this video is timely because I just got home last night from my cruise on MSC Seascape. First, let's talk about the ships, the hardware, because this is where MSC is making its strongest argument right now. MSC has several ship classes, and the ones you are most likely to encounter sailing from US ports, because this is traditionally a European cruise line, it's based in Italy, but in US ports, you're gonna typically find 2 classes. The Seaside class, what I call the sea ships, and the World class. The Seaside class is built around a philosophy of bringing guests closer to the sea, and it's made up of 4 ships. And I don't love their naming convention because it gets really confusing, and I've cruised 2 of these ships, and I always get them confused. But they're Seaside, Seaview, Seashore, and Seascape. And I always say, Sally sells seashells by the seashore. The 2 newer ones, Seashore and Seascape, are a slightly bigger and more enhanced evolution of the originals that MSC calls Seaside Evo. All 4 share the same core DNA though, a dramatic atrium style interior, which if you are familiar with Carnival and their older ships, you are probably familiar with that, expansive outdoor deck spaces, and a sea-forward aesthetic. The World class ships are a different animal entirely though. MSC World America launched last year with more World ships planned, and these are among the largest ships at sea, and they're much closer in scale and ambition to what you're seeing with Royal Caribbean's biggest vessels, like the Icon class. These reflect a deliberate and confident push toward the American, and specifically toward the North American market. I've now sailed Seascape twice, Seaside once, and I also had a wonderful time on World America back last summer. These are genuinely different experiences despite carrying the same name brand, and that's important to know. World America is the one that stopped me in my tracks. The open promenade design, which by the way, looks a little familiar. I can't help but think that the MSC architects literally just took Royal Caribbean's kind of ship design and copied and pasted it. It really does feel like Royal Caribbean, and that's not a bad thing unless you have a problem with copying other people's style, because I do think that Royal Caribbean builds some of the world's most beautifully designed ships at sea with those big sweeping promenades. And World America feels like it absorbed that playbook and executed it very seriously. Now, World America is one of my all-time favorite ships. I absolutely love that ship, and I don't say that casually after as many cruises as I have been on, which I think I'm nearing 50 cruises at this point. Seascape, though, still a great ship, but it's a different experience. The Seaside class atrium, again, I talked about that atrium style, it's gorgeous. You've got 4 decks of glass, chrome, Swarovski crystal staircases, and when the ship is quiet and you're looking around, it feels so elevated and elegant. It feels electric. But when entertainment is running, and it runs often and it runs loudly, the downside to the atrium style is that the sound carries everywhere. At one point during my cruise, I had to speak with guest services about something, and it was during a show, and I could barely hear the crew member across the desk, and it was like shouting. And in fact, I'm a little bit hoarse probably from that, and also just having a really good time on this cruise. So that atrium style is beautiful, it's cool, it really kind of makes multi-level deck experiences feel like you're part of the entertainment, and you can enjoy the entertainment even when you're just walking across the ship, because that atrium is midship, but it does create some sound issues. So if you are booking a stateroom on a C-class ship, I recommend avoiding those rooms that are right there smack in that middle of that area, right by the atrium, because that sound really does carry. So that is a trade-off that's baked into that Seaside class design, and it is worth knowing before you board. And if you do have to visit guest services, try to plan that around anytime a show is happening in the atrium. Another thing worth knowing about MSC is the smart elevator systems. This one kind of drives me crazy. A lot of people don't like the big cruise ships because there are so many people. Cruise ship elevators are notoriously a pain point. They're slow, they're always overcrowded. Cruisers seem to really fail when it comes to elevator etiquette. And with MSC, that problem is a little bit more elevated because they use smart elevators. Now, some other cruise lines use them sporadically here and there on their various cruise ships, but MSC uses them on pretty much every cruise ship, I do believe. And a lot of cruisers complain about smart elevators, but I actually love them because once you understand what it's doing and how it works, the efficiency is legit. You just have to know how to use it right, and most people don't. And I wish the cruise lines that have smart elevators would simply put a sign up that explains this, such a simple solution to a real problem, and why they don't is beyond me. But I'll give you a really quick lesson in how you use them. Say you're a party of 5 on this cruise. It was my kid, my niece, my friend, my man, and me, 5 people. We go to get on elevator, we're going to deck 11, which is where my stateroom was located. You don't just hit 11 one time for a party of 5, you hit 11 5 times, because a smart elevator, smart, and it calculates how many people need to go into that car. And if I only push the 11 button one time, it only calculates for one person, not 5, so that car is going to get overfilled. So then it's unnecessarily making stops. It defeats the whole purpose and it messes things up and it throws the whole thing out of whack. So when you have thousands of cruisers that are using these elevators wrong, it really does create a problem. Now, another bit of a pain point is non-smokers. I'm a non-smoker. I try not to judge people who smoke, but I do have allergy issues, as does my man, so smoke really does bother us. When it comes to smoke, as casino players, World America was a much more comfortable experience. The casino there is pretty much non-smoking. They do have a cordoned off smoking section that's walled off and it's really separated, which I really do like. But Seascape is pretty much all smoking. They have a non-smoking section. Of course, the worst games are located there. But of course, that smoke is just coming over because there's absolutely no barrier at all. And for even non-casino players, if you're on deck 7 and you're going from forward to aft or aft to forward of the ship, you gotta walk through the casino. And that means sometimes even with kids, and you're going to encounter the smoke, which is frustrating. And another tip, if you are booking a room, you're sensitive to smoke, try not to book a room on deck 8 right above the casino, because oftentimes you will smell that smoke coming up through the vents. It's also important with MSC to understand their tiered system, because this is a little different, especially if you're used to sailing with Carnival, Royal Caribbean, and other more mainstream American cruise lines. Before you book MSC, you've got to understand how their experience levels work. That's what they call it. And showing up without this knowledge is the fastest way to end up confused from day one. And I will tell you, I think I took 3 MSC cruises before I actually realized this myself. But basically, to break it down in simple terms, MSC has 4 tiers. Bella is that entry level. This is where you're going to find that value pricing. These are your guaranteed staterooms or your GTY staterooms. That means MSC is going to assign your cabin for you. So you may end up in a stateroom on deck 8, right above the casino, where you're going to smell the smoke. You may end up in a noisy area. You may get fixed early or late dining with no guarantee on your preferred dining time. And you get everything included that you would expect on a cruise, but you don't have as much flexibility and choice. It is a legitimate way to ball on a budget, especially if you're really there for the port. Some people take cruises, they see their cruise ship kind of like an airplane. It's just a vessel to get me from point A to B to C to D and then back to point A. And if that's you, Bella is a great value option. Fantastica is the next step up. With Fantastica, you do get to choose your own cabin. You get priority on dining reservations. And for most people, this is kind of that happy medium. It costs a bit more than Bella, but it does give you much more control. Aurea is where things do get genuinely interesting. And this is the tier that I sailed most recently. Traditionally with MSC, I have sailed Bella and Fantastica because I ball on a budget. But this time I was in Aurea tier. And with this, you get the best cabin locations on the ship. You get priority boarding. You get thermal spa access. Unfortunately, I did not have time to make use of that because I do work from sea and I didn't have a lot of free time in the evenings. But for me, the thing that I personally valued the most with the Aurea class is the dining. If you have Aurea class, you get My Choice Dining. This gives you a dedicated restaurant. And on Seascape, that Skyline restaurant on deck 7, you get to walk in anytime between 6 and 9:30 in the evening. You don't have to make a reservation, no assigned seats, no waiting. It's really flexible and it's really nice. Now, the food is going to be the same rotating menu as all the other dining rooms, but unlike other cruise lines that traditionally have basically one big old MDR, MSC does it a little bit differently. And with Aurea class, the experience of being able to just show up when you feel like it is really important. Because for me, I really do prefer flexible dining, because sometimes you might have a short port of call, you're back on the ship early, maybe you are balling on a budget, so maybe you didn't eat when you were off the ship and you're starving by 6 p.m. and you want to eat. But other times you have a long call, you're tired, you come back, you take a shower, you take a nap, you wake up, you get ready, oh, it's 8:30, now I want to eat. So I really do value that flexibility personally. Now, the highest tier, the one you probably hear about a lot with MSC, because people love to talk about it, is the Yacht Club. This is that ship within a ship tier. With this, you get private restaurant, you get a private pool deck, you get butler service, and they're literally dressed like butlers. It is fully all-inclusive. Now, I've heard nothing but universal praise about Yacht Club. I don't think I've literally heard one single complaint about Yacht Club, and that is very rare in cruise world, because I love cruising, I love cruisers, but we are also not shy about talking ship and complaining when we have something to complain about. But I've heard nothing but great things about Yacht Club. Now, I personally have a hard time justifying the price. Every time I make a video about MSC, everyone's like, oh my God, you have to try Yacht Club. I am not gonna pay that, my friends. I'm just not. Now, one day if I ever catch a really great upgrade deal, I will probably do it for science, for you all, so I can make content off of it and also so I can experience it. I'm not gonna lie, but I'm not gonna spend thousands of dollars on it, especially because I cruise free on casino offers. And I also cruise often, so it's just not in my budget. But if that budget is available to you and you want that bougie, fancy, all-inclusive, elevated cruise experience, then it deserves some serious consideration. Now, one quick note for Carnival loyalists, and loyalists to any cruise line for that matter, but I call out Carnival because they've had probably the most loyalty shift in the past year due to their VIFP change. MSC does have a status match program. So if you've built up status on Carnival, Royal Caribbean, some other cruise line, but you are curious about trying something different, especially because MSC brings the value, and I'll get to that in a minute, you do not have to start from scratch. And that removes one of those biggest psychological barriers to making the switch. And I actually just made a video about this, I'll drop the link below, about how we kind of get these loyalty programs, they get us into a chokehold and we end up overspending and sticking with one cruise line when actually there may be better options for us that could save us a whole boatload of money. Their status match is really easy, and they don't just match cruise lines, they also match hotels as well. So if you have status with other cruise lines, hotels, whatever, make sure you submit that status match. It does take a few days though, so don't do it right before your cruise, but also don't do it too early either, because you want your status to get to the highest level possible before you pull the trigger and go ahead and submit that status match. Now let's talk about the food. A lot of reasons that people love to cruise is because of the foods, the drinks, and the good time. Now let me start with the context that makes this food conversation meaningful. I talked about that Magnifica sailing. To date, I'm not even gonna say one of the worst, it was the worst. Unequivocally, it was the worst cruise I've ever taken in my life, a little over 3 years ago. And it was the worst food I've ever encountered. And I have low food standards, my friend. Seriously, I can eat a Happy Meal and be happy, but it was really, really bad. Now, Seascape, it is not that. I have actually sailed Seascape before. I found Seascape food to be much better than Magnifica, but Seascape this time around was significantly better than the last time I sailed on Seascape. In fact, my experience on Seascape and on World America, hot take here, but I actually would say their food is pretty much on par now with Celebrity. I like Celebrity. I find Celebrity to be kind of bland, and I don't mean that in a bad way. It's kind of sedate, it's kind of bland. That's just kind of my take on Celebrity and how I like to cruise. I know some people that are very enthusiastic and they love Celebrity, and that's awesome, but for me it's kind of eh. So MSC food, you've elevated yourself pretty solid to good. And in cruise world, when you're serving thousands of people, that really is not a dig. I promise that it's not. It's really hard to consistently serve that many people, 3 or sometimes, depending on how you like to eat on a cruise, 4 or 5 times a day, consistently well. It's really hard to do well. So good to solid in my book when it comes to cruise food, that's actually better than average. Now on our 7-night cruise, we ate in the MDR pretty much every single night. We limited our exposure to the buffet because I have a little bit of OCD. I've seen a lot of gross behavior and I don't like buffets for those reasons. And I also commend MSC because on Seascape they have actual hand wash stations, which unfortunately about 80% of cruisers just waltz right by. That and the hand sanitizing station, and that's why we always have norovirus on cruise ships. People wash their hands. So I generally avoid the buffet, but I did pop in there. My daughter and my niece ate in there and they actually said it was pretty good. Now the real standout with MSC is always going to be the pizza. It is an Italian cruise line. The pizza is always good. Even on Magnifica, when the food was really, really bad, the pizza was still good. And in fact, I basically lived off pizza for the duration of that cruise. And while the pizza was good, by the time I got off that ship, I'm like, I don't want to eat pizza for like a month. Now with MSC Seascape, the 4 main dining rooms, they all run on, as I mentioned, that same rotating menu every single night. None of it blew me away, but none of it really let me down either. For a cruise line that spent years as a punchline in the cruise food conversation, that is legit progress. And for me, that's always been the one pain point that has always held me back from cruising MSC more often. So now that they've got their food game more on point, I'm gonna be much more inclined to sail with them. Now, the specialty restaurants on MSC, these are a genuine highlight, and they're definitely worth factoring into your budget. All 5 are clustered together on deck 8, which makes the area feel kind of like a restaurant district. They have Butcher's Cut, it's a steakhouse. It's around 55, 60 bucks per person, on par with what you see with the other cruise lines. And when it comes to cruise line steakhouses, I think they're all pretty daggone good. I love a cruise line specialty steakhouse restaurant. Another specialty option with MSC is Ocean Key, and that's also the name of their private island, which is actually one of my favorite private islands, which is another high mark in MSC's category. Now, I didn't visit Ocean Key on this cruise, but I have on other MSC cruises. Really, really love Ocean Key. But Ocean Key, the restaurant, it's their seafood option. It runs around 60 bucks per person, and it has probably the most upscale feel of the group. Kaido Sushi runs on a color-coded conveyor belt system, so they've got those plates coming by, and they range from $6 to $14. And Kaito Teppanyaki is your traditional hibachi experience at a set price. Now, the standout here, which is Hola Tacos. It's the casual option. You can do all you can eat for $24.99 per adult, or what I typically do is just do it a la carte because I don't eat $25 worth of food usually, and that is an option, which I did not realize on World America, but I figured out on Seascape. I think the food at Hola Tacos is really good. It's a nice casual option. It is my personal favorite. I will say it was better on World America than on Seascape, so sometimes you can even get a little bit of a discrepancy between ships, which is another little nuance when you're watching reviews like this. Someone can have a great experience on one ship and it's a different experience on another, even though it's the same restaurant concept and it's the same menu. Now, MSC does offer multi-meal dining packages packages, that can be a good value, but you kind of have to keep an eye on the specials and the deals, kind of like you do with Royal Caribbean. They have this dynamic pricing and it can be kind of frustrating to watch, but this is another great reason why it's awesome to have a travel agent who does this kind of thing for you at no extra cost. And by the way, if you need a travel agent, I know some people, and no, it's not me, but I know some people. I'll drop a link below. I actually have an MSC specialist. She can hook it up for you. But when it comes to their multi-meal dining packages, they start at $99 per person for 2 restaurants, and buying before the cruise obviously is going to save you the most money. So this is where you got to do some cruise math. If you're going to be going to Ola Taco twice, it makes absolutely 0 sense to buy a $99 dining package, because you can just buy the all-you-can-eat option for 25 bucks, or even cheaper, go a la carte. On one of our first days of the sailing, my man and I went to Ola Tacos for lunch, and both of us, it was 18 bucks. So it actually can be a pretty good value if you go a la carte and you don't eat a ton of food. Now we need to talk about the drink packages and then about Vinci. MSC recently simplified its US program to 3 options. The premium extra package for drinkers, that's pretty high. It's about $85 to $95 per person per day with gratuities included. There's an alcohol-free package that's around $33 to $42 per day, depending on when and where you buy it and all that kind of stuff. And there is a minors package that's around the mid-20s range. Like most cruise lines, everyone in the cabin has to buy the drink package. That's pretty standard, and it is still annoying though when there's one person in your group who likes to drink but others who do not. Now here's the thing that's worth knowing for your budget. MSC's drink packages are priced roughly in line with Carnival and Royal Caribbean, so the value advantage that makes that base fare so compelling, it actually does not carry over to beverages. So while MSC is an absolute steal on fare pricing, that's where you're gonna save. The drinks are not. Now I do appreciate that MSC offers a non-alcoholic package specifically because I am someone who rarely drinks, and usually we are the ones that really get the short end of the stick. But even their non-alcohol package, for me, it was a big no. To buy it on board on the ship, I think it was 42 bucks per person per day. Obviously, if we'd bought that in advance, it would be cheaper, probably around the low 30s. But either way, I'm not drinking that much coffee, tea, juice, and stuff like that. Basic juices are included for breakfast, standard coffee, tea, things like that. We can certainly live on that. And we did buy the occasional soda. I think it was around $4.25 for an occasional ginger ale. And I treated the kids to Shirley Temples every night, and they felt really fancy. And we ended up spending pennies on these a la carte drink options compared to even the non-alcoholic drink package. And I also want to talk about Vinci, because this is home to not just some of the drinks. In fact, that was my home base. My man and I, we love coffee drinks, specialty coffee drinks, but it's also a full-fledged chocolate shop. It's really awesome. It is pricey. The drinks are pricey, and as someone who does like my one daily iced mocha, it's a little bit of a hard pill to swallow when it's about this big. That's a large, and it's $8. So that does get really expensive. It does kind of leave you missing other options like Royal Caribbean, where you can buy, for example, their coffee punch card and get drinks much more affordably and in more reasonable American standard sizes. But Vinci is legitimately cool, and the chocolate shop element is also really neat, and I can't tell you how amazing it smells. Now let's talk about the vibe, the service, and what MSC still gets a little bit wrong. MSC sails an international crowd. So if you take an MSC cruise, you're probably going to see more folks from Europe than you are on Carnival, Royal Caribbean, other mainstream and traditional American cruise lines. And you'll also find that MSC skews distinctly Latino, which I think is amazing. I love the diversity. I love seeing quinceañeras happening on board. That's happened on all but this most recent MSC cruise. And that does shape the onboard atmosphere, and it's worth knowing before you board. Why? Because there's a heavily Latino influence. There are going to be lots of dance lessons. They're going to be Latin. You're going to hear a lot of Spanish. You're going to hear a lot of Latin music. And out of Galveston, you're going to hear a lot of country music. So it was a really interesting hybrid of 2 genres that I don't particularly enjoy. Half Latin, half country. And it did kind of leave me missing my Florida Carnival sailings or my Florida Royal Caribbean sailings, because I am a hip-hop girly through and through. So if music is a big part of shaping your cruise experience, that is important to know. And MSC has leaned hard into the Texas flavored programming in Galveston. As I mentioned, you're going to hear lots of country. Live country music bands, line country dancing classes, along with the Latin dance classes. You're going to find a US-based comedian, which is great for American cruisers because sometimes European humor might not land. And the dueling pianos have a really strong reputation as entertainment. They also have things like steel drum performers that are kind of scattered about near the pool and in the atrium. And I always love a good steel drum, so that is a nice touch. Now, full disclosure, my personal entertainment experience is pretty limited on this one because unfortunately my daughter's spring break conflicts with mine. So I do have to work when I cruise, and on this one I was working pretty heavily. So at night we would go to dinner, maybe get a little casino time in, then I really had to spend time on my computer doing work. So I didn't get a lot of time to enjoy the entertainment. Now on a prior cruise on a different Seascape sailing, I caught a Michael Jackson Jackson-inspired show that I genuinely loved. I gotta say, it was pretty low production value compared to some of the things that you get on a Royal Caribbean, say, Oasis class sailing, things like Aqua Theater, but I really loved it. It was really, really well done. But I will note that that particular performance featured a pole dancer. Don't worry, she was mostly clothed, but that might raise eyebrows among more traditional cruisers because MSC, remember, it's a European cruise line and you are gonna sometimes feel those European vibes in things like entertainment, things like pricing being presented not just in dollars, but also in euros, like measurements that are on the metric system. And on a prior MSC sailing, one time I walked by trivia and it was famous Italian actors and they're showing the faces. And I'm like, I don't know who these people are. So MSC is starting to move more toward an American audience for the sailings that are out of American home port locations, but you will still feel some distinctly European flavor compared to the mainstream North American cruise lines. And when it comes to entertainment, MSC, like Celebrity, they tend to lean pretty heavily on silent discos. I am not a fan of silent discos. I think it is a cheap and easy form of entertainment. If you like them and love them, great, that's awesome for you, but I am not a fan and I wish that they would go away. Now for families, they do have a Do Re Mi Kids Club, and this deserves a specific mention. Now my daughter just turned 13. Sometimes she wants to go to kids clubs, sometimes she doesn't, depending on the kids that she meets on a ship. But if you are the parent of a little kid, you'll find this to be a really good thing about MSC. And that is the fact that rather than confining children to just one room all day, staff actually take kids out and about around the ship. So as a casual cruiser, you'll see the kids out and it's really kind of neat. And parents consistently note the difference and it makes the kid club feel much more engaged rather than you kind of got these kids contained. Now let's talk about service. And this is where I want to set honest and realistic expectations. Now on my Seascape sailing I just came home from, my cabin steward, Red, he was exceptional. He was really, really awesome. And we also had some standout crew here and there that were really, really friendly. They remembered your name, that traditional cruise experience. But generally speaking, the crew on MSC, you're going to find are pleasant, neutral, and professional. That's not a bad thing. But what is missing if you're a frequent cruiser and you like this element of cruising is that warmth, that effusiveness. That warmth and effusiveness is significantly dialed back compared to what most North American cruisers expect. You're not gonna find towel animals, you're not gonna find those over-the-top personalized touches, you're not gonna find crew members so excited to see you and greeting you by name. And if that is a particular style of hospitality that's central to what makes you love a cruise, you will feel its absence here. Now, I will say on Seascape, just like the food has had significant strides in improving, the service has as well. The service on Magnifica, the crew seemed like they were being held hostage, like they hated life. I have had not great experiences with service on MSC cruises in the past. That really started to change with World America. So I think in the last year, year and a half, MSC is making a concerted effort to be more like Royal Caribbean, Carnival, Princess, Celebrity, all the mainstream cruise lines that Americans typically sail out of American home port locations. So I commend them for the improvement in service, but it still is different. Now, my one quibble I still have with MSC. I am at the point I've done a complete 180 with MSC. I went from staunchly saying I will never sail them again, don't sail them, to they're kind of okay, to okay, actually book it on conditions. But there's one major beef I still have with MSC. And if any MSC people watch this, I really hope you listen, which is the Wi-Fi situation. And this is important if you're like me and you have to work from sea. On MSC, once you activate your Wi-Fi package, which I don't have to tell you, you know Wi-Fi on cruise ships, it is not cheap. Once you buy your package, you lock into a certain device on your sailing, you're locked in. You can't switch. You can't share it. You can't say to your kids, I'll give you 15 minutes to keep your Snapchat streaks alive every day. You can't say, I'm gonna turn off the phone, switch the Wi-Fi to my laptop so I can do some grading at night and then go back to my phone. You can't do that. So what I had no choice but to do was to pay for 2 separate Wi-Fi connections. And that absolutely infuriates me. So I had to pay for Wi-Fi just for a few hours of Wi-Fi at night so I could do my grading and do my professor work. And then of course I needed my phone regularly throughout the day because I make content. And I also have other obligations at home that require that I have connection. So this is important to build into your budget. And when you're comparing prices, yes, MSC is a great value proposition. That's its biggest selling point. And I'll get to that in just one second because it is very real, but you do have to account for the fact that Wi-Fi might cost you twice as much as it might cost you on other cruise lines. And you have to account for that when you're doing your cruise math. As for pricing, again, it's not cheap. MSC's Browse and Stream package for a 7-day sailing, it runs roughly $163 to $217 per person. And of course, that huge variance depends on specials and promos they run, when you buy pre-sailing versus on board, stuff like that. And it does come out to be about $23 to $31 per day. Now they do have a 24-hour option available. My friend and colleague who was cruising with me, she took advantage of that one day. So she could do laptop work on top of the phone, which she had bought for the whole 7 days. So it is a real real pain point. Now, in comparison, Carnival's premium Wi-Fi runs around $26 per day, assuming you buy a pre-cruise. Royal Caribbean's Voom Surf and Stream runs around $20 per day per device when you buy pre-cruise on sale. So the per day prices across all three lines, they're in the same range, but MSC is slightly more expensive. And when you account for that device lock policy that can turn one person's needs into two purchases, that cost really does start to accelerate. So if you do need multiple connections, make sure you buy the multi-device package instead of each person in your room buying it individually, because that's going to be significantly cheaper. And that is the case with most other cruise lines as well, not just MSC. Now, I told you what I don't like about MSC. I'm always very honest. I'll always talk ship, good, bad, and ugly. But I'm going to tell you the real reason why I now tell people go ahead and book that MSC cruise. And that is the value proposition. A 7-night Western Caribbean sailing from Galveston. This is the one I just did. Same ports, same itinerary. Price it out, okay? So Costa Maya, Cozumel, Roatan. So the prices obviously can vary, but I want to give you a breakdown of how MSC compares to some of its competitors. In shoulder season, the gap of pricing between MSC and the other cruise lines is really dramatic. MSC Seascape in mid-April currently starts around $385 per person for an inside cabin. That's about $55 per day. I'm sorry, that is a freaking steal. You can't feed a family now in this economy for $55 a day. So to get your accommodations, all of your food, your entertainment, that is a steal. So I do still think cruising in general is a great value proposition, and MSC especially so. But comparing this to other cruise lines, right? So you're looking at $55 per day for MSC. In that same window, I priced out different cruises in mid-April, same itinerary, same length, right? Royal Caribbean's Allure of the Seas came out to $754 per person, or $108 a day. Twice the price. Yes, friends, twice the price for the same exact itinerary. Carnival Jubilee runs comparable to Royal Caribbean in about that same range. So if you're looking at going to a Western Caribbean itinerary with those 3 ports on a 7-day sailing, you're paying half the cost on MSC compared to Royal Caribbean and Carnival. That price difference is significant. Now, by summer, that math starts to narrow, but MSC still holds value. A late May sailing on Seascape starts around $801 per person, so $115 per person per day, while Carnival Jubilee in the same window starts at $814. So those are essentially equal. Now, Royal Caribbean now starts to come ahead of being much more expensive. They're around $989 per person, or $141 per day for a comparable sailing. So being completely honest, if I were pricing out a sailing and it was Carnival versus MSC, and the price difference were that minimal, I would probably lean toward Carnival. I do like their food a lot better than MSC, and I like their entertainment more as well. And I do think Carnival does have generally more things to do for kids. But during those times of the year where the price difference is significant, of a magnitude of Carnival and Royal Caribbean being 2 times more expensive, I would absolutely recommend that you book MSC. The takeaway here is that MSC's price advantage can be really significant, and it's going to be strongest in the spring and the fall. So that is the ideal booking window if your flexibility and schedule allows you to book during those times. But even in peak summer though, with MSC, you can get some really great prices, but it is valuable, I think, to compare to the other cruise lines and find the best value for what you're going to enjoy and for what is in your budget. Now, cruise prices across the board have been climbing, and the lines that used to represent the affordable end of the market, Carnival, are not as affordable as they once were. MSC has held its value in a way that its competitors have not, and that gap, especially spring and fall, is significant enough that it changes the conversation for cruisers who may have never even considered MSC even a couple of years ago. I'm gonna be honest, MSC is not for everyone. If you really need that warm, over-the-top, I know your name, effusive, personalized service and towel animals every night and dancing in the dining room, if that is central to what you love about cruising, MSC, probably not it. But if you're primarily there for the destinations, or you just want to take a cruise on a beautiful ship with solid and consistent food that's actually sometimes quite good at a price that leaves real money in the budget for the experiences in those ports, probably honestly that you're going to remember more than the cruise itself, MSC makes a really compelling case. The line has improved in ways that matter. The value is real. And I say this as someone who used to be probably the #1 MSC hater and someone who swore them off and said she would never sail them again. And in fact, I'm looking at a World America sailing for the summer, so gotta keep sailing MSC, and I hope they keep improving.